We did last month, where we did just a big overview of executive functioning or EF um, areas. So today we're going to do a quick little review of just a couple of slides, and then we're going to focus specifically on how executive functioning difficulties impact behavior. So just again, a quick review. Executive functioning is sometimes referred to as the chief executive officer of the brain because really it's the set of mental skills that help the brain to organize and act on information. So your executive functioning skills are responsible to for everything you do. And it's independent of how smart you are and how much you know. Rather, it's your ability to express or to translate what you know into action. So impairments or difficulties in executive functioning can cause you to be very disorganized, very inattentive, very emotionally reactive because of the frustration they cause. And when we can better understand executive functioning, it enables us to be more empathetic. It reduces conflict between us and the individual, and then it guides us to more effective interventions. And so that's the goal today, right? Is for us to better understand it so that we can be guided to do more effective interventions, whether they're our children we're talking about, another family member, or a student. So this is just to illustrate that downward spiral that happens when especially kids in school have executive functioning problems and just the miscommunication and the misunderstanding that can result. So from the student standpoint, they may feel like the demands are really just too hard or sometimes maybe too easy if they're very smart, that they're stupid, the demands are pointless. And from a teacher or a parent standpoint, it might be that that's being interpreted that the individual doesn't really care about their work. A student may feel like the directions are very confusing, and the teacher or parent might feel like they're just not listening. Um, the student may say, even when I try, I fail. So again, that downward spiral, they start to get frustrated and it impacts their self-esteem. And the teacher or parent is interpreting that as they just need to try harder. The student may feel like I can't sit and pay attention because they can't keep still. And the teacher may or parent may not realize that and just say, well, they're just not paying attention when the student in reality might be really trying. Again, the student might interpret that as the teacher or parent not caring, and the adult may feel like the student or child just doesn't respect them. So you get the idea. It's just this misinterpretation and then miscommunication and kind of, creates a roadblock between the two. That's what we're going to talk about today. We want to broaden your understanding in hopes that this downward spiral can be alleviated. So just another reminder that executive functioning difficulties occur with lots and lots of other um, struggles or disabilities. So they're associated with autism, ADHD, learning disabilities, traumatic brain injury, obsessive compulsive disorder, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, some health impairments, some emotional things like anxiety and depression, and also importantly, stress and trauma. So I would venture to guess that everybody on this Lunch and Learn has had executive functioning difficulties at one point or another. because of some stress they were going through or some trauma. So maybe a move or a job change or a divorce or the loss of a loved one, and you find yourself in that position where you're having difficulty remembering things, paying attention, staying organized, keeping yourself from getting overly emotional. And if we're lucky, those things go away once we settle in to whatever has occurred. But for some of the individuals in our lives, whether they're family or students, those difficulties are lifelong. Um, so we talked about all the areas, and you'll see it written different ways depending on what your resource is. But
No,
for
I
the purposes
forgot.
of today, we are going to focus on working memory, flexible thinking, and inhibitory self-control, and look at just those three areas and how they impact behavior. So first of all, working memory. And if you remember, we talked about it's temporarily holding information and doing something with it so that you're keeping it in mind while you're doing a task or while you're following an instruction, right? So it has to do with the ability to complete a task because you can remember what you were supposed to do, and following directions again because you don't forget what the directions were. So also we're going to talk about cognitive flexibility or flexible thinking, and that's just enables you to shift your attention from one thing to another as situations change. It's your ability to adapt to change and to problem solve in new situations, right? And then the last one is inhibitory control, and that's sort of self-control in a way. It's regulating your impulses and your distractions, um, and keeping yourself in check so that you can exhibit appropriate social behavior. So we're going to look a little bit more closely at those three areas, and I'm going to show you some supports that you can use to support any individual, whether it be family or student. So again, working memory stores and manipulates information. And it helps you to do like multi-step tasks. It also helps you to problem solve. Um, and it also helps you to multitask. So, for example, working memory, if you're a student, you might have to listen and take notes. You might have to remember the rules of the game while you play it. So it does involve manipulating information that you have and enabling you to be successful in things that have steps to them. If you have difficulties in this area, you tend to appear to be very forgetful. You might have difficulty following instructions and completing tasks. Um, it also impacts like remembering what you need for a certain task, like being able to get your information together. And what we talked about last time was that all of these areas do overlap to some degree. And so some of the things we talk about are really overlapping with the other areas. Um, Something you'll see in their behavior is that sometimes it's going to look like they're avoiding doing something when in reality they're just trying to remember the steps to getting it done. That creates frustration, which can also result in emotional outbursts and from the frustration of not being able to remember what it is they're supposed to do. You also might see withdrawing because of cognitive overload. If they can't remember the steps, that might be the kid that in group kind of hangs back, waits for peers to do things because they simply can't remember what it is they're supposed to do. So the ways we can go about helping or supporting these individuals, number one is to break tasks into steps. That enables them to take on one thing at a time. And when we do that, it's really, really important that that be in writing. Because once we write it and give them something that they can check and recheck, it's going to help them to be more successful. That gets it out of memory and gets it concrete on paper for them to look at. And just general visual cues are always going to be your way to go. Give them something to reference so that they can independently do what it is you want them to do. Here's just a couple of other ideas, and you guys see this in schools and have used them. I'm not so sure if these get used a whole lot in families or at homes, but it's always a good strategy for home or school. A to-do list or a checklist can be as simple as things on a sticky note, just reminders, and allows the learner to go through the steps and check them off. Chunking information. So, like if there's a body of things, something to read or whatever, chunking it into digestible parts creates it makes it a whole lot easier for someone with short-term memory issues because they can take one piece at a time. Things like graphic organizers, like you see on the bottom right, which is a visual for organizing a story or a lesson or something like that. It makes it easier for them to remember what the story's about, who the characters are, etc. And then the one in the middle is a mnemonic, and that's just like you create an acronym and each of the letters stands for something, and it's a whole lot easier to remember the acronym and have that be your be what triggers you to remember the steps of what it is you're supposed to do. The next thing we're going to talk about briefly is cognitive flexibility or flexible thinking. And like we talked about, that's helps you adapt to changing conditions. When you're cognitively flexible and not rigid, you can revise your strategies and revise your plans and kind of go with the flow. This is what enables you to go with the flow, right? Without freaking out. So, what you will see in individuals who tend to be rigid cognitively and lack this flexibility is that when things change, they're going to be, it's going to cause them to be anxious. They might have resistance during changes. When you're in classrooms, what you might see is that the students have really a lot of difficulty transitioning because that means you have to stop what you're doing, refocus, and be flexible enough to move on to something else. These are also individuals that might have one way of doing something, no matter what the presenting difficulty is. So they'll be very rigid in how they approach and try to solve problems. Um, so what you might see in behavior if someone has these difficulties is that they may misinterpret social cues because they aren't thinking flexibly. They tend to be kind of black and white, and they may be argumentative. When they are that rigid cognitively, they feel like there's only one way to deal with a problem. There's only one solution to the problem, and it is the one that they have in their head. So when they're rigid, they don't tend to accept your ideas for the solution because they're unable to move off of their own ideas, right? And they're going to get very frustrated and anxious during disagreements. So some of the things you can do for them is, first of all, you want to accommodate that by having a very predictable environment and consistent routines. Eventually, you will help them to be more and more flexible, but where you need to start is to have those predictable, consistent routines that they can participate in and anticipate. And then gradually you'll teach flexibility through the structure that you create. So you want to have visual representations of steps, of rules, of expectations. And then when at all possible, have changes be gradual to help reduce their anxiety. So the main strategy that we promote for individuals who may struggle in this area is priming, and that is heads up, giving people a heads up when things are going to change or be different whenever you can. So these are just some basic ones that we use. A change of alert. Instead of this happening, this is going to happen. If it's somebody who's on a visual schedule, that we have an icon that represents oops or change and saying we're going to do this and this, but uh-oh, look, there's going to be a change today. Um, and depending on the student, how far ahead of time you have to do that, but you want to build those skills in by gradually creating changes that you help them adjust to. And then again, when you're transitioning from one thing to another, using timers or visuals that let them know that time's almost up so that they can begin to adjust to the change. Um, a lot of times it can just be visual cues or reminders that you might want to post, things that help them to sort of support themselves through what might be stressful changes. So these are just an example. A try another way card, that would be something that you might post on the desk when they get frustrated because what they are trying is not working, just supporting them to try another way and then helping talk them through what some of those other ways might look like. And this again, stay calm, think of ideas, think about what the outcome might be for some of those ideas, choose your best idea, and then decide if it worked or not. So those are just some visual kind of reminders for individuals to promote them to think more flexibly. These are just some additional ones. Stop, breathe, shift, try. Um, there's another one using an acronym for IDEA: identify, define, explore, act, look back. So this is a whole way of helping them to think more clearly and problem solve when they are getting stuck. And then finally, one of the things you'll see too is when things don't go quite their way, that rigidity could result in them getting stuck on something. Something didn't go right and they can't quite get that out of their head. And so this is just big deal. Was it really a big deal? Was it a little deal? And helping them sort through something that has happened, figure out what they need to do to be better about it, because they do tend to get stuck when things don't go their way. That rigidity can result in that. And then the last one has to do with needing help. When I need help and I don't understand, and it gives them three choices. I can do this, this, or this. So again, showing them that there's more than one way to solve a problem and they get to pick one. And then the other is the same kind of thing. It gives you choices when something's not going right. The next one we're going to talk about is inhibitory self-control. And that's what the ability to control your emotions and your behavior and sort of stop yourself before you respond to an impulse. So if you don't have good inhibitory control, you may behave without thinking about the result or the consequences, right? It's just that quick impulse that they give into rather than having that ability to stop and think about what it might mean if they actually do that behavior. So what you'll see in these individuals is these are going to be the individuals in classrooms who are going to be your blurters. Um, they're um, they're going to be the kids that talk out. They're going to have difficulty taking turns. These guys are not particularly good at waiting because they have something an impulse that's killing them to get out. These are kids that might have difficulty with first then contingencies, because they want to get to the then. They want to get to the thing that they prefer. Um, these are guys that lack emotional control and the ability to control their emotions. So it could mean that they tantrum, they have meltdowns, they might have physical aggressions because, again, they have that impulse and they follow through on it without being able to keep themselves in check. They also, this lack of self-control also impacts being able to pay attention because those impulses are going through their heads and they pay attention to them rather than to whatever the task is at hand. So it does impact attention and focus. So we already talked about these guys are going to be the ones who blurt, but they're also going to be your unsafe decision makers because they can't stop and think and rationalize, if I do this, what do you think is going to happen down the line? They can be physically impulsive, doing risky things physically. They can have difficulty getting along with others. They can also be very emotionally dysregulated because once they have an emotion, they will act on it. So some of the support strategies that we can use for them, again, visual supports, we're going to say that every time. Sensory tools, so looking at ways to help them when you start to recognize that they are becoming emotionally dysregulated, and tools that help them to read their own cues so that they can become independent at doing some things that calm them. Also, looking at structured routines for these guys, those are going to help them to follow the rules, to know what's coming next, and to be successful. And then, like we talked before, metacognitive strategies, and we'll give you the definition and talk about that in a sec. So here's one that makes taking turns concrete for younger kids. The bead slides over. It gives them something to focus on, and makes taking turns more concrete. And some kids find that this is very, very helpful for them. Um, this one is just a stop, wait, and then make a choice. For some of the younger kids too, we use the talking stick. We want you to think first, then raise your hand, and then share. These are the guys that raise their hand and have no clue yet what they're going to say, right? Because the hand went up before they thought. So these are just some visual reminders that help them stop and think. Again, this affects friendships and relationships because when you are impulsive, you may say things that you wish you hadn't said. So this think one you may have seen in several different places. It's actually on my refrigerator. And again, it's an acronym that helps you to remember before you speak, is it true? Is it helpful? Is it inspiring? Is it necessary? Is it kind? And then just a reminder, a visual reminder, stop and think. That could be posted, it could be on a lanyard, it could be around a classroom or on your refrigerator at home. Just to remind people to think before they say things, because you can't take words back, right? And then I wanted you to see this one. This is one that we created from some of the research, and it's called a social autopsy. And this is a reflection that you would use after the dust has settled, when there has been an event. And again, this is helping someone to kind of now stop and think, since the impulse has already been acted on, about what actually happened. What happened? Who did I hurt? How did I feel? What should I do now? Because we want them to think about making amends. And then what should I do next time? And again, it shows them choices to reinforce the fact that there is more than one way to deal with things. And this is a great tool. They can go through, they can circle it, but it is meant to be done with a facilitator of some kind to take them through it. These are also some self-control things that you may have seen before. I think the rainbow's pretty common. You see that in different places, a lot of times in classrooms, and they trace the rainbow and take deep breaths. And then the one on the right is something we use quite a bit from the research and the resource, the Incredible 5-point scale. And this gives them a visual when they're feeling a certain way. What are some choices about what they can do to stay emotionally regulated and to deal with whatever the stress is that's going on? So, in summary, when we encounter someone who may be exhibiting these things, and we never thought before that it could be brain-based difficulties, that it may not be intentional behavior, and that these individuals would love to be more successful. Here are the things that we've talked about in summary. We want to provide, in combination, environmental supports as well as behavioral supports for them. So environmentally, structure, predictability, reducing sensory distractions as much as possible, having very consistent supports, and most of them will be visual because cueing them auditorily over and over is not near as helpful. We want to do things that promote independence and confidence and success. And again, these visual supports will help them be more independent and be more successful in doing what it is they need to do. And then in conjunction, those behavioral supports. So we want to use instructional strategies in the classrooms. Again, visuals that help them know the rules in the classroom, know the steps if it's an academic thing. So those kinds of strategies and supports. We want to use behavioral ones like some of the ones I showed you. Metacognitive strategies is helping them to evaluate how they're thinking. So in other words, if they tend to be rigid, it's like, well, that's only one way to do it, but let's think about some others. So you're helping them to actually take stock and to begin to understand how they can do things differently. And that's going to promote independence and self-advocacy and success. And then again, you want those supports to be integrated into your settings. So I hope you found some strategies that will help you to be successful and help you promote success in your child or student. And we have one more lunch and learn in the executive functioning cycle. And that is executive functioning strategies in the classroom, practical application. So that's going to look at specifically classroom. There'll be some tips that you can use to help those things be easier to do when you have a classroom full of kids. So we hope you'll tune in. Melinda's going to do that on April 17th. And I want to thank you for joining me today. And then if you will, just take a minute and click on this QR code and tell us if you found this helpful. Thank you so much, and we hope you'll join us next month.